Welcome to Creative Mornings, Charlotte. There are so many stories of people who have met in this room and are now collaborating on businesses and projects. And that's one of the reasons why we're gathering together, because why DIY when you can DIT, right? Take photographs, post them all over the place, use the hashtag Charlotte is creative, because Charlotte is creative. And don't just use it this morning, use it all week, use it all month. Anytime you see something creative happening at work or out in the community, post it and say hashtag Charlotte is creative. In the next 2 weeks, anyone who puts the most creative post out there using this flyer will get a golden ticket. You won't have to register next month. You'll get a golden ticket to the next event.
House again. I'm standing in the pulpit. I'm jumping up and down.
Henry, what is your strategy this morning?
I was gonna make a smiley face, you know.
Okay. Yep, as long as you're using the ingredients, that's all that matters. 30 seconds to plating.
I have a melting pot of flavors. Starting at the very bottom, I've got grapes, great raisins, goldfish crackers, and then I've got the pickles all the way around and the marshmallows centered throughout.
I want to get everything. All right. The word unforgiven is coming to mind. I feel angry. Like a little angry. Harry, tell us about your dish, please.
Well, I was just thinking about the presentation mainly, and wanted to make his eyes out of pickles and raisins. Yeah. And yeah, the bagel really acted as the face.
Yeah. I see that. Is this an appetizer, an entree, or a dessert?
I think it's an appetizer.
I think that's as good a guess as any. Let me have a taste. Okay, thank you. Wow, I feel like all my nightmares just enrolled at Johnson & Wales. The wait is over. We are exploring Serendipity, and we're super excited for the main event now, which is Charlotte's own Nick de la Canal. WFAE's Nick de la Canal can be heard on public radio airwaves across the Charlotte region, bringing listeners the latest in local and regional updates. He's been a part of the WFAE newsroom since 2013, where he began as an intern. His reporting helped the station earn an Edward R. Murrow Award for coverage following the Keith Scott shooting and protests in September 2016. His work has been heard on NPR's All Things Considered, Latino USA, and other national programs. He did grow up here in Charlotte. He went to Myers Park High School. And he got a degree in journalism from Emerson College in Boston. Ladies and gentlemen, here to speak to us on our global theme of serendipity, please welcome Charlotte's own Nick de la Canal, everyone. Come on up, Nick. Here he comes. Woo!
Hey, well, good morning. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so excited to see everyone. Normally, I spend my days alone in a radio studio, so it's nice to see people. All right, so when Tim and Matt first asked me to come, I had two thoughts running through my head. First was, yes, I'm so excited. I'd never been to one of these things before, but I'm sitting in the back, and it sounds very exciting. And the other thing was, gosh, I better make sure I know exactly what serendipity means. Because I kind of thought I knew. I knew it had something to do with like dumb luck, that sort of thing. But after doing some more research on the interwebs, what I found is it's like a fortunate happenstance, but it's one that you were not seeking to find, or that you were going out trying to find, that sort of thing. So I think like a good example of this would be like a meet cute. You're watching like a romantic comedy, and there's a guy walking down the street, and he spills all his papers on the ground, and then the girl rushes up, and she helps him pick up the papers, and oh my God, it's his soulmate, Like he didn't wake up in the morning expecting to go out and find that, but there was this event, and then there was a fortunate discovery. So this could also be job related. Tim and Matt wanted me to tell the story of how I actually got my job, which, to be fair, is actually a pretty good example of serendipity. So for those who don't know, I made a little bit of a name for myself when I was a high schooler at Myers Park, and I wrote this 2-act musical that kind of lampooned our high school, and ended up getting suspended for it. And then later at graduation, I actually rigged up my pants and gown with Velcro, and this happened. Yeah, that is an action shot there. So anyway, this stunt actually landed me an interview with WFAE. And that is how I met everyone at the station. And the news director at the time, well, he later told me that from that interview, he saw something. And I think, not that, but what I think he saw was 2 qualities that are actually pretty good for a journalist. One is someone who writes, and the other is someone who just lives to rage against the man. Rage, you know? Those are both really good qualities. Again, like I wasn't necessarily seeking an in with WFAE from this, but you know, it worked out. I don't think a career advisor would recommend this, but it worked out all right. Okay, so since we're all kind of caught up, hopefully, from that, the kind of serendipity that I want to talk about today is the kind that we can use as creatives in the creative process. I'm assuming there are a lot of creatives in the audience. So think about it. I bet that serendipity, more often than not, has supplied you with some of your best ideas or creative breakthroughs, or just like moments of inspiration that you didn't anticipate. You might start working on one thing, something happens, and then you realize that you've got something completely different coming. Serendipity can really be our best friend as creatives. It can represent like the best case scenario. So to prove it, I have 3 stories that I want to share about 3 people who were struck by serendipity and created something really incredible from it that they weren't expecting. And I believe that there are lessons to be learned here, so I hope you all pay attention. Okay, so let's start at a research laboratory in Minnesota. The year is 1968, and imagine, if you will, a guy called Spencer Silver who's sitting at the laboratory with his lab coat and his bell-bottom jeans. I'm assuming it was the 60s. And he's trying to develop an adhesive that's strong enough to build planes with. This is what the company makes. What he ended up doing was creating pretty much the exact opposite, which was an incredibly weak adhesive that couldn't hold much weight and wouldn't really stay stuck if you like pulled 2 objects apart with it. But he thinks this probably has some marketable qualities. He thinks that this must have some kind of use. He's thinking maybe like for a bulletin board, you could like spray this stuff on, then slap whatever you want on top of it, and then when you don't need it anymore, you can just peel it off, that sort of thing. He spends the next 5 years trying to market this idea to his bosses, who turn him down because now, as then, bulletin boards aren't really the hottest of products. But he keeps working on it and he keeps refining it. And then later, in 1974, so that'd be like 6 years later, there's another guy who works at the same company whose name is Art Fry, and he's a faithful member of his church choir. And he's in church one Sunday and he's singing, and he realizes that he's got this constant problem where his bookmark keeps falling out of his hymnal. And I can attest, as a former member of a church choir myself, this is a problem. You're sitting up in the choir loft and your bookmark falls out. Usually it's going to fall like 2 rows in front of you by the altos who can't even find the key. They're surely not going to find your bookmark. Okay, we've got some former choir members in the audience this morning. That's good. That's good. So anyway, this day in 1974, right? Art Fry, he has this problem, and he remembers this weak adhesive that his colleague has been working on. And he realizes maybe they've got it backwards. Maybe they shouldn't be putting this on a bulletin board, but they should be coating this on the paper so you could just stick it onto stuff. Maybe like small squares of paper. You guys know where I'm going with this? This is the Post-it note. This is how the Post-it note was born. Now, the company spent about 3 more years working on this, after that one fateful day in church, developing and perfecting what they called their low-tack adhesive paper squares. I think the name needed some work on that, but that's before it went to market. And when they finally did send it out to offices, they realized, wow, this is a really useful product, and it became one of the best-selling office supplies in history. So that's a pretty common storyline for like the origins behind a lot of inventions. So like a few other household products that were created by accident, or I would say by serendipity. There's the microwave oven, smoke detectors, artificial sweeteners, X-rays, a lot of blockbuster drugs of the 20th century. Rogaine actually was created through this process. It started out as a pill for people with high blood pressure, and they realized after people were taking it, sort of growing their hair back, that it had other qualities. And it was a fortunate discovery. So that's where I want to go next, serendipity in science and kind of like scientific innovation. I have a real fascination with like bloody, morbid literature. I don't know, for whatever reason. Like I hate bloody movies, but I can totally read the books. So I was on a kick once where I was only reading books with the word blood in the title. So I'd gone through Mixed Blood, In Cold Blood, and Blood Surfer, which is a really good book. I highly recommend. And so I picked up this book called And the Waters Turned to Blood, which is by a former journalist named Rodney Barker. And this book is nonfiction, and it details this major scientific breakthrough that happened just 160 miles east of us in NC State. I'm not sure if that's east, but get your compass out. So I was not alive at the time, but apparently in the 1980s, people were going swimming in coastal lakes and rivers, all up and down the East Coast, and months later, they would develop these open sores that wouldn't heal, and just a whole host of other really terrible symptoms, a lot of Alzheimer's-like symptoms. And doctors just couldn't explain them. They didn't know what was happening. So a student named Stephen Smith, who was a PhD student, he was studying fish at the university, and one day he dumps 50 tilapia into a 300-gallon tank. And he comes back the next day, and half of the fish are dead. And this is not what he was expecting. He hadn't even started the experiment yet. So he tests the water, he runs it through a couple tests, and the test comes back clean. There's nothing wrong with it, at least on paper. But he notices there's something kind of clouding the water, so he puts a sample under a microscope. And he sees this microorganism that he's never seen before. He tells his advisor, and his advisor tells him, you know what, just start the experiment over, whatever. So he does, but the same thing happens. He comes back the next day, half his fish are dead. So he begins to study this on the side. He's still working on his main research. But he's studying this over several months. But several months later, he's still getting nowhere. He can't get a clear picture of this thing. He can't identify it. So he tells his advisor again, who reaches out to another researcher at the university, a woman named Dr. Joanne Burkholder, who is still alive. She's I think, still with the university. And over the next several years, they worked together to identify this organism, and they find that it's this carnivorous plant/animal that no one has seen before. And it becomes known in the media as the cell from hell, because it literally will eat fish alive by the thousands. It was causing these massive fish kills, they realized. And a lot of it was in part because of pollution coming from hog farms that were nearby. And this is very controversial. Obviously, the industry did not like this research. But they also determined that this was responsible for a lot of the terrible side effects that were happening to people who came in contact with the water during the fish kills, or around the same time. And the way they found that out was because they themselves started experiencing the symptoms as they were working with this. So this is one of the most astounding discoveries, I think, to come out of the research triangle. I mean, no one had thought that like an organism like this could even exist beforehand. I think it's one of the, not very well known, but it's a really great book that details this. Now, I think that if that student had been working that day with fish and with water from a nearby river, I think that this cell probably would have presented itself to someone else, or somebody else would have picked up on the trail. But that's not the way it happened. The way it happened was serendipity picked this guy on this day to present this cell, and it took him acting on it and trying to follow up on it to really get the ball rolling for this discovery. So those are two examples from areas that I honestly have no experience in. And Tim and Matt wanted me to talk a little bit about myself and my industry. So let's talk about the news world then. Which, as you may know, operates on kind of a faster pace than science world. We don't really have years to work on stuff. So I'll let you know a little secret about how the news works. A lot of the news, or at least in the news industry, we try to predict and anticipate the news as best as we can. And that's just to help us get stuff out as quickly as possible. On election night, most news organizations had 2 stories pre-written, one for Hillary Clinton and one for Donald Trump. We also pre-write a lot of obituaries too, which sometimes gets a little awkward when you're starting to call around someone's friends and associates, trying to get details about their life and accomplishments, and they start to ask, so-and-so not doing so well, and you say, no, not really, but they're just getting a little up there in age, and we want to be prepared, that sort of thing. We're trying to be prepared. So all that preparation aside, though, you inevitably are going to stumble across stuff that you had no idea was coming and that there's no way to plan for. And that's usually the stories that people's ears kind of perk up at. So I want to talk about the most read story that I have ever written. And I want to preface this by saying that I do strive to be a serious journalist who writes on serious topics and does serious journalism, but this is my most read story to date. Joel Ford's campaign manager will limit Ford's GIF use after he tweets out a defecating dog. So I will fill you in on the backstory here. So Joel Ford is a Democratic state senator. This is actually rather recent, so he then and now is running for mayor of Charlotte. And what was happening was there were 2 activists that were tweeting at him one night, and they were being very critical of his record, particularly on LGBT issues. And Ford's Twitter account responded to them, but it was with a GIF of a guy rolling his eyes. And when one of the activists tweeted back at him, criticizing him for not using words in his response, his account again responded, but this was with a GIF of a defecating dog. And I think we have that GIF. One more time, can we? So, I'm sorry, I know you all just ate breakfast. All right, that's enough. So the day that this happened coincided with our pledge drive. And well, that's a good thing, because that meant that I was not doing hourly newscasts, which is what I normally do during the weekday, and I normally don't have much time to do anything else. So anyways, I came across this pretty early in the morning, and I showed this to my editor, and we both agreed, yeah, this is a story. But rather than just right away start writing it, I figured that I should take some time to try and call up the campaign manager, just to try and get a little bit more substance, try and get a little bit more of an explanation. And so I did. I went to the studio, I called up the campaign manager, I identified myself as a reporter, and the first thing he says is, "Oh, hey, I'm about to get into an elevator. Can I call you back in like a minute?" And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, no, definitely not. If I let him get off of this phone, he's going to hang up, he's going to block my number, and I'm never going to hear from him again. If I got him on the phone, I got to keep him here. But for whatever reason, it was early in the morning, I hadn't had my coffee yet, and I was in the moment, and I said, yeah, okay, call me back in a minute. And he hangs up, and I'm beating myself over the head, because I'm thinking, that's it. I'm never hearing from that guy again. I feel like I blew it. I'm sitting in the studio, and about a minute later, I'm getting ready to get out, and the phone rings. And I pick it up, and sure enough, it's a campaign manager. He called me right back. So I transfer him into the studio, I get my tape rolling, I get my level set, and I figure the best way to open up this conversation was just with an open-ended question. I ask him, all right, can you just give me your response on this tweet here? And he says, oh, you mean the tweet about the dog? I said, yeah, that's the one. And what he gives me is just this rambly, really perfect answer, which was something to the effect of, well, I talked with Joel this morning, and he was going for awkward. He picked this GIF from the awkward section of his keyboard, and I looked at my GIF keyboard just this morning, and sure enough, it's right there in the awkward section. And we're thinking that maybe we're not going to use GIFs moving forward, because every time we've used them, they haven't been very well received. And so these are good things. He's confirming that it was the senator and wasn't a staffer or something like that. And I ask, okay, well, is there anything that you guys are going to be doing moving forward from here? Maybe you're going to apologize or something. And he says, well, we're thinking of putting together like a pre-approved list of gifts for the senator. So this is all really great stuff, but it's stuff that you probably shouldn't be telling a reporter in the middle of a campaign. So anyway, the interview only lasted about 5 or 10 minutes. But I mean, right away I knew that this interview expanded so well on that original tweet. So anyway, I filed the story about an hour or so later, and already some other news organizations were reporting on this, but no one else had talked to the manager and gotten these crazy quotes. So by the end of the day, the Associated Press had picked up on this story, which is it's a wire service, and that meant that every news organization in the state started reporting some version of this story with the campaign manager's comments. And by midnight, the Washington Post, sadly, had picked up on this story, and it had published a brief. So for me, yeah, I think that this was a pretty crazy case of serendipity. For the Joel Ford campaign, this was probably an example of zemblanity, which is actually the opposite of serendipity. This is for the vocab quiz at the end. To this day, that remains my most read and shared story, and interpret that as you will as the state of journalism today. Anyway, so what are some lessons that can be learned from this? I think a couple of things. The first is that luck favors the prepared. That's so pretty. Serendipity may strike, but you've got to be able to recognize it and know what you're doing to turn it into something. One of my favorite quotes is, "Art is fire plus algebra." That's by a writer, Jorge Luis Borges. And in that vein, I think serendipity is like a two-part process. So the first comes from that moment of fire when there's an accident or a event or whatever happens. And the second is all the boring work, which is when you refine the original idea and you try and turn it into something that really hits the mark. You've got to know your algebra to turn the fire into art. Again, it took 3 years after that day in church before the company was able to turn the Post-it note into the Post-it note. And that was just a lot of work of refining and making it into something that was going to be really useful. After my news director first saw me after high school graduation, he didn't hire me right away. I interned with them, I had to study journalism, and I did a lot of freelancing, and I probably had to prove that I wasn't a nut, and then they took me on full time. So whatever your field is, make sure that you're really dedicated to that, and you're constantly preparing so that when serendipity strikes, you'll be able to recognize it, and you'll know what to do with it. The second is to produce a ton of stuff. Photographers will tell you when they go out into the field, they take hundreds, maybe thousands of pictures and come away with just a handful of shots that are really good. So you can. I've probably written hundreds of news items, and the Washington Post has only picked up one. So I think that you can increase your chances of getting struck by lightning if you just produce a ton of stuff, and then your chances to improve that one will have that strain of serendipity in it. And finally, I think it takes relentless optimism. So see opportunity everywhere you look and believe that there is something there and that you're going to find it, even if you don't know what it is yet. Poke your nose into anything that you're curious about because there might be something there. You really have to believe. If you don't believe that there is gold in them there hills, you're probably not going to go out and look for it, and you're not going to find it. So to close, my advice is to study up and grab a pickaxe, because I'm telling you, there is gold in them there hills, and I believe that you will find it if you look hard and long enough. All right, thanks and happy hunting.